Okay, it's 5 o'clock. I'll call this meeting of the Public Works Board to order, and we will, Misty, can we have a roll call?
Mr. Picard?
Here.
Mr. White? Mr. Waters?
Here.
Mr. Pellicek?
Here.
Mr. Beekle? Ms. Schmager?
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll now move on to item number 3, election of president.
I would like to make a motion for Mr. Mark Picard to be the president.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Are there any other nominations? Seeing none, Misty, will you call the roll?
Mr. Waters?
Aye.
Mr. Pellicek?
Aye.
Ms. Schmager?
Aye.
Mr. Picard?
Aye.
Motion passes 4-0.
Okay, Mr. Picard, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. You got it, Mark. I'll stay here, right? There's no reason to sit over there. All right, election of vice president. Anybody like to make a nomination for vice president?
Well, I move that
I'd like to-
Mr. Waters would be our vice president.
Unfortunately, I don't believe the city council representative can do that. Is that correct? I don't know. No Dan here today. I know, I'm almost positive they can't be the president.
I will pull up the code, otherwise, Bill, you want to go
Let's
check on Dan?
let's just make it easy, and I'll decline. And I'd like to nominate Mary Schmager.
There you go. I'll second that.
All right, we have a motion and second for Mary. Help me out with the name here. Schmager? Schmager, okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Mary Schmager. Any other nominations? Other nominations? If not, I will close the nominations and we will take a roll call vote again.
Mr. Pellicek?
Aye.
Ms. Schmager?
Aye.
Mr. Picard?
Aye.
Mr. Waters?
Aye.
Motion passes 4-0.
All right. We now have a president and vice president. Next on our agenda is item 5, correction and/or approvals of the minutes of April 11th. Anybody care to make any corrections and if not, motion to approve?
I move approval of the minutes of April 11th, 2023.
Second. Motion and second to approve the minutes. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion passes. Item 6, questions and public comment. I don't see anybody. If there's anybody? Nope. Okay. Moving on, item 7, director's report.
Thank you. I've got a number of items I'll move through quickly. First of all, staffing, it wasn't on the agenda, or I didn't have it on my report last month because we had made some headway. And I guess as these things go now, we took a step backward. And so now we do have openings in the streets department, the water department, and the wastewater. In fact, we'll have 2 openings in the wastewater department here at the beginning of June. So we do have a number of resumes that have come in the last week or so, and we'll be starting interviews next week. The yard waste, I'm just going to keep moving. If you've got a question, just stop me, please. Yard waste center, we're going to talk about that a little bit tonight. I just want to give you a little preview that we have put together some initial cost estimates for a drop-off site only, as we discussed at the last meeting. And what we want to do in the closed session this evening is ask you to help us identify the best potential site or sites, because there are some differences in what we can and can't do, how they may work or not. So rather than identify costs for 3 or 4 different sites, we're going to see if we can narrow it down to 1 or maybe 2 at the max. So that's what that closed session is all about. The LSL program, I think I mentioned to you that the funding that we had last year got extended to this year. The caveat is that we have to have all the work done by the end of June, and then all the paperwork submitted to the DNR by the end of July. We had enough money left over from last year to do, I think, between 16 and 18 LSLs. We sent out letters to all the people that still have LSLs in hopes that we could fill that quota. And as of today, we have 13 people, 13 residences that have committed to finishing their LSL work, and I hope we get at least a few more. That keeps us very well in line with what the DNR requires from year to year, which is about 7% of the remaining LSLs. And so overall, we will still stay way ahead of where we need to be. Not where we want to be necessarily. We'd like to get rid of all these things, but where we need to be. And we anticipate that there will be some new round of funding next year. What that will look like, not sure. But the hope again is that this year we reach our quota, and then next year a new program kicks in and we can get some more of these done. Cost of service studies, as we mentioned a few months ago, we've been working on those. My understanding is that right now the studies are either 99 to 100% finished, and so you will be seeing those next month and having a chance to ask questions and make some decisions on how we proceed with that. I can preview that by telling you the electric rate or the electric cost of study shows that an electric or a rate adjustment of 5% or less may do it for us. I'm hoping it's closer to 4%. And on the water side, something under 8%, I believe, or right close to 8. That's kind of an important threshold, because at 8%, based on the PSC rules regarding water utilities, we can do what's called a simplified rate case, which allows that to happen a little faster and allows us to implement that a little quicker. Now, given the time of the year and how long these things take regardless, we're probably, at least with the electric utility, if we proceed with some kind of a rate adjustment, I don't anticipate seeing that implemented till mid to late 2024. The water utility rate, that could happen this year, but that probably will also be a decision you'll have to make. Do you want to implement something this year, or do you want to wait? But that's a preview of what you will have to look at and talk about next month. I will just also tell you then that the ATV, UTV signs are up. We're official. They are now allowed on every street in Lake Mills, including Highway 89. The second to last thing I've got, I'll preface this by telling you that every once in a while, we send an email through the city headed "in case you get phone calls." And so this is an "in case you get a phone call" item. The DNR is going to be doing some significant tree removals on their property by the fish hatchery, and I mean significant. And so you may get calls from people wondering what the heck's going on there. I just want to emphasize that it's the DNR doing work on their property. It's not us, and we have nothing to do with it, but it's going to be drastic and it'll be noticeable. So if you get phone calls, and I'm going to sneak one in here and...
Can I ask a question on the DNR?
I'm sorry, what?
Can I ask a question about the
sure,
DNR
yeah.
tree removal? What is the rationale? Do they have like emerald ash borer trees, or are they just clearing for some other purpose? I'm just curious.
It's both.
Okay.
They do have some ash trees that have to go, and then they've got some larger mature trees that are either dead or are just not what they want in that particular area.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Thank you.
You bet. You're welcome. And I'm just, like I said, I'm going to sneak this in. This week is the MUW, the Municipal Electric Utilities of Wisconsin Annual Meeting. And I'll be in attendance there, and we will be receiving a Silver Safety Award. The Silver Safety Award, I should back up. MUW provides our job training and safety programs, our education programs. They do legislative and regulatory agency advocacy. But their safety award system is set up so that you can get a gold, a silver, a bronze. And it's based entirely on the number of staff hours you work accident-free. So we don't have enough staff or staff hours to reach the gold level. So the silver level is the highest we can reach, and this will be our 6th consecutive award. And so I'm just really proud of how safe our staff works and that they pay attention to that, and I wanted you all to be aware of that. So thank you.
Hey, Paul, this is Greg. Greg Waters. There's 2 Gregs on this board now. So, I did see that there was another honor out there that you probably don't like to talk about because it's a personal honor, but didn't you receive an honor recently from the utility?
Yeah, I received an individual achievement award from WPPI. I don't believe in individual achievement, but that's the award they gave me. So thank you for mentioning that.
Awesome.
Well, fantastic, and thank you for all your work here in Lake Mills. We really appreciate what you've done over the years, and it's been a delight to work with you. I think your retirement's coming up quickly, and I didn't want to miss an opportunity to thank you. So,
Well, thank you. I will tell you that we are getting another award at MUW, and this was one that I was nominated for by, I'm so sorry, by our staff. It's
great.
the Meritorious Service Award. So
Congratulations.
Fantastic.
sorry,
Nice.
I'm not very tough. Apparently, if you live long enough and you get awards that say, here you go now, goodbye. So
I think
Thank
it's
you.
a lot more than that, Paul, but thank you for everything.
Thanks, Paul. Any other questions or comments for Paul? I just had one question, Paul, about the first item, the staffing. Is that new people quitting and rolling, causing turnover, or more experienced people, or a combination?
it's a combination, Mark. It's the market right now, you know? I will tell you, one thing that happened that was totally new to me is we had hired a gentleman and we had him ready to come on. And even before he started, he let us know that he wasn't going to be able to do that. And I've never had that happen before, but it's just every other director of public works, utility manager I talked to, we're all going through the same thing. And so it's a combination, experience, new,
Okay.
so
Yeah.
it's just the way of the world.
It's,
right now.
and it's the labor market as it is right now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, thanks. Anything else? All right, then we'll move on to number 8. Update and discussion on wastewater treatment plant anti-degradation rule changes and sewer rate study.
Thanks. I want to, if I may, Travis, I just want to jump in here real quick and just give an introduction to this one. You know, we've been talking about the and I practice this too, those rules that pertain to the Crawfish River. So we want you to see very clearly what the impact of that will be. And then Travis has been working on the rate impacts of a new plant or how we want to proceed. And so I'm going to preview this one by telling you that what we're looking at here is probably pulling back a little bit and taking a little more time to make sure that, number one, we've got all the information we need to move forward based on what the DNR is going to or not going to decide. And then as Travis put the rate impact information together, it became pretty clear that it's not feasible at this time without some assistance. And so you'll see that in the presentation. But that's the gist of it. And now I will ask Travis to go ahead and get into the details. Thanks, Travis.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Paul. You want to pull up the slides, please? All right, so as Paul mentioned, this is part of the larger facility planning effort that is going on for the wastewater treatment plant. And an outline of what I'm going to be talking about. I'm just going to spend one slide on the background because I think we're all fairly familiar with the background and the needs that are happening at the wastewater plant. But really, I'm going to be focusing on two things tonight. The potential rule changes related to anti-degradation, and then the sewer rate study updates and maybe how we'll shift or explore additional strategies related to what we've developed as far as potential sewer rate impacts. And then we'll conclude with what our thoughts are on the timing of next steps. So just again, a brief background, the needs for major upgrades at the plant. Just want to reiterate, as we mentioned at previous meetings, regardless of what decision is made as far as going to a new plant or staying at the existing plant location, there are major needs at the wastewater plant due to both age and capacity. And the needs include lower phosphorus discharge rules that were implemented about 13 years ago but are now coming into effect for the city, or at least there needs to be a plan in place for meeting those new rules. Generally, as each year goes by, there's more stringent effluent limits that are being mandated by the DNR. The majority of the plant now is at least 30 years old, which is typically beyond the useful life of wastewater equipment. There are future increased flows and loads. As a part of any facility planning effort, we need to look ahead 20 years and make sure that the wastewater plant's going to be having adequate capacity to serve the needs of the city. There's capacity issues with liquid sludge storage and potential regulatory issues with future land application. Of course, the city wants the ability to grow, and that needs to be factored in. If Rock Creek is ever reclassified by the DNR, that could result in more stringent limits. The ability to access a larger effluent point is one of the major considerations for moving the plant, taking advantage of a larger river like the Crawfish River. And then just geographical constraints at the existing plant. The plant is landlocked, and that is an issue that will have to be dealt with at some point in the future. So the DNR has proposed potential rule changes related to anti-degradation, and these are rule changes, or these are rules that have been on the books as far as preventing degradation to our waterways in Wisconsin. And what they're proposing to do is basically make those rules more strict. So just kind of at a high level, what's going on is at each permit term, which happens every 5 years for wastewater plants, the DNR calculates limits. So they have dedicated limit calculators on staff, and they go through and they write a memo and they calculate all the limits. And one of the key things that they look at is the assimilative capacity of the stream, which is basically how much dilution is available in the stream for it to receive a wastewater effluent. And right now, the way the rules are on the books in Wisconsin, they're allowed to use 1/3 of that assimilative capacity, or 1/3 of the available dilution for calculating those limits. So if there's not much dilution available, if you have a small stream, or if it's already close to the water quality criteria, that means you can discharge less. So that's why it's advantageous to discharge to a larger stream, because you have more of that assimilative capacity, and that means that you can have less stringent limits. So what they're proposing to do is change that rule so that instead of just having 1/3 of the dilution available, you can only use 10% of the dilution that's available. So you can imagine when they run their calculations for what effluent limits the plant will receive in their permit, if you're only allowed 10% of the dilution instead of 1/3, it's basically going to cut your limits by a third of what they were previously. So, and this gets triggered when you're increasing your flows and loads, which, as we're working through a facility planning process, we're looking to increase the plant's capacity to allow for city growth. So that's why these anti-degradation rules would get triggered. Also, if you're moving your outfall, they would get triggered. If you could go to the next slide, please. So if you recall from maybe it was a year and a half ago now, when we were working through facility planning, we worked with DNR to have them, we worked with them to calculate limits for the various treatment plant options that we were looking at, whether we were going to stay at the existing site or stay at the existing site and move the outfall to the crawfish, or move the whole treatment plant completely to the crawfish. Those were the three options that we looked at. And each option had different effluent limits. And what this potential rule change would do is it would impact the limits that we're calculating for all the items that are highlighted in those red boxes. And we don't need to go through each of those, but basically for BOD, ammonia, TSS, those limits are all going to have to get recalculated, and very likely they would get more stringent. They're not going to get more relaxed just because of the nature of what they're proposing. If you go to the next slide, please. So the bottom line here is, if this rule change passes, which I believe it will because it's being driven by EPA, this will require an anti-degradation analysis. So this is a procedure outlined in Wisconsin code that allows for an economic analysis to compare alternatives, because what's going to happen very likely is that these strict limits are going to push the economic costs far above what we were originally projecting. And there's a means within the Wisconsin code as a part of this anti-degradation analysis to say, it's going to cause, severe economic harm to a community if we go to this higher level of treatment. And there's thresholds within the code to be able to go down to a less costly option with less stringent limits, but you have to work through that analysis as a part of this process. So we've talked to DNR about this change because, of course, we wanted to know how it might impact the decision of moving the plant. And they said that what would likely happen is Lake Mills would need to propose limits based on need. So as a part of this economic evaluation, there's likely going to be some negotiation on what the final limits are. So the bottom line is, with all this, I think this is going to happen. I don't think it's a game changer for the bigger picture discussion of whether the plant should move or not, because of the economic evaluation that's available to go to a lower cost option. But this change is likely going to make the Crawfish River option not the very relaxed limits that we were seeing. If you could please go back one slide, please. Yes. So option 3 here had the most favorable limits of any of the options. What will likely happen here is that option 3 would not be as favorable from a limit standpoint because of this. I don't believe it's going to get to the point where it would be unfeasible, or even that it would necessarily, that this change would dictate what option you choose, but it's something that you should be aware of, because eventually this table, which we've shown in tech memos and we've shown in previous presentations, this is going to change as a result of this rule change if it gets passed. And that's what we want you to be aware of, so you're not surprised by that when that comes up in the future. Just one note on this table, though. This rule change does not impact phosphorus, because that's its own TMDL, total maximum daily load calculation. It's a completely separate calculation that's done outside of this potential rule change. So you would still have the favorable phosphorus limit for the Crawfish River discharge, but it's very likely that the other limits would possibly change. So that's a high-level overview of the anti-degradation rule changes. More to come on that. I think we'll know yet this year, possibly within the next few months, kind of more details on the timing. But like I said, I do think that is something that's going to proceed. So maybe before we move on to the rest of the discussion, I'm happy to field any questions on the anti-deg potential rule changes.
Anybody have
No
any questions?
Okay.
Yeah. So going back to the anticipated effluent limits slide, as an example, the BOD of 31 to 45 or 30 would be cut to about 1/3 of that, which would be close to the current option 2 existing wastewater treatment plant Crawfish River. Is that correct?
That's very likely what would happen.
And the phosphorus limits for option 2 and option 3 are already the same and would likely stay the same then, correct?
That's correct.
Of course, they're all, phosphorus could, like all these limits, get more stringent in the future.
Anything's possible, right?
Do you think they might get more lax?
No.
Okay.
Okay, so then shifting
I
gears
got
a little.
quick question, or not really a question, more of a statement, Travis.
Sure.
I guess the positive here is to know about this before we started on this project or went any further on this project. Looking at option 3, that makes us one of the most expensive utilities in the state. And if we would have went ahead and done that and then got these new standards, we would have been in a lot of trouble. It would have been a real bad situation. So to know this before we push forward with our project is a positive, and it allows us to take all factors into consideration here. So I know it's not a good thing that the rules are changing, but at the same time, it's good to know that before we push forward with our project and we're able to consider everything. So it's positive in that response.
Yes, more to come on this as we work with DNR. Of course, they're hesitant to get too far into the weeds with us until the rule change actually moves forward. So once that happens, then we'll be able to work with them and then share more details on how the calcs are working out with the
It'll be
city.
interesting to learn. Yeah, it'll be interesting to learn more about that economic evaluation potential that may allow us for lower cost options to see if there's something that can be done in that regard as well.
Yep.
When will this rule take effect?
They were hesitant to provide me with the timing on that, but I would anticipate yet this year.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so we'll put together a simple table here of the kind of where the benefits fall as far as a new versus an existing plant for various criteria. These are all items that we've talked about in previous meetings, but ability to respond to growth. Of course, a new plant with plenty of acreage would allow for that, so we've got that as a benefit to the new plant shown by the green circle there. Initial cost and initial rate impact. Having to construct the new plant all at once, get that infrastructure all in place at the same time with your current rate base, that's a downside for a new plant versus staying at your existing plant. And that's what I'll talk about more in the next slides. And then there's a lot of reasons why we were looking at a new plant. Because it is more beneficial for space for sludge application, ease of construction, the regulatory constraints, particularly related to phosphorus, proximity to residences. Obviously, your current plant is located right in the middle of the city. Public relations is kind of a toss-up at this point, and then just strategically, of course, if you were to pick any place for your wastewater plant, you'd probably pick a different place today than where it is right now. If you could go to the next slide, please. So we've developed some draft sewer rates, and I just want to emphasize that they are draft at this point. This is not a final recommendation or anything like that at this point, but we did run the rate analysis for the city for the new wastewater treatment plant option and how those rates might be ramped up to the construction completion date, which would be approximately 2028 for a brand-new facility. So you would have to have your rates fully in effect by 2028. And it is a very substantial rate increase above your current rates. You can see it gets a total increase compared to today's rates would be about a 186% rate increase. So, obviously substantial. So just kind of talking through this, the needs and benefits of replacing the current treatment plant are numerous, and we've talked through those. But again, there does need to be a project that moves forward. Do nothing would not be an option for the city for your current wastewater needs. But we need to balance any of those rate adjustments for the project and really carefully consider how that might be implemented. The best technical solution, just if we set rates aside, it does appear to be the Crawfish River, just because of all the various reasons that we've talked about for really strategically looking long range, looking longer than 20 years. There are a lot of advantages to a new treatment plant at the Crawfish River from a technical standpoint. But looking at these rate calculations for a new plant, I would say they do look to be prohibitive without some type of assistance. This would put you at the very top of the state as far as the highest rates. You can see looking at the monthly dollar amounts here going from $47 a month to about $135 a month in this scenario. And I guess I want to point out in this scenario here, this does not assume any added users to the system. And obviously that's a variable too. As you get more users, whether they're residential or industrial, that adds to the pool of revenue, decreasing your required rate increase. That is not factored into here. This assumes a constant number of users. So a final decision needs to be balanced between that ultimate flexibility that a new site would give you versus the rate impacts that we're seeing here. And if we go to the next slide, please. So a couple options to mitigate that rate impact. One being potential federal funding. So I understand that the city has submitted a request for potential federal funding that could be applied for this project. And Drake, I don't know if you want to add any more to that item before we move on to the next bullet.
Certainly. It's a request for congressionally directed spending through Senator Baldwin's office. And so as part of the budget development, she submits a handful of projects to the subcommittee for consideration, and then they move through or don't move through the federal budgeting process. We submitted for $44 million, 80% of our projected the projected cost of building a new plant on a new site. The likelihood of being awarded or not, I'm not sure. We won't know until the federal budget is adopted, which at the earliest usually is November, December time period. So it's an option that exists out there, one that could potentially be pivotal in determining how we move forward. But we are in a wait and see pattern with that opportunity.
Okay, thanks, Drake. So that's one. If there's funding that's received, that could obviously impact the rate structure, and then remaining at the existing site, looking at that from a rate standpoint, the advantage is that you can phase in your improvements. It's not an all at once thing like constructing the new plant, and I can show some examples of that in the upcoming slides, but kind of the strategy for that moving forward would be to look at population trends, data, potential new industries, kind of look at a strategy for increasing the capacity at the existing site over time while utilizing new technologies like aerobic granular sludge, which has a smaller footprint, or utilizing biosolids drying, which greatly reduces the volume versus a liquid sludge. Again, that's more conducive to a tighter footprint. We can look at some of these newer technologies to kind of overcome that landlocked site constraint. That can allow us to develop more of a phased plan. But again, I'll just reiterate, there's a lot of significant needs at the plant. And when we look at the overall cost for ultimate build out at your existing site versus constructing a new site, the costs are similar. You're not necessarily saving capital cost by staying at the existing site. What you're doing is you're spreading it out over decades instead of 5 years. So that's where the benefit is from a rate standpoint, because in theory, you're going to be growing over all those years, and that's going to allow you to have a less % increase on your rates if you have a larger number of customers. Next slide, please. So just a reminder, we've shown this slide before, but these are the official population projections from the Department of Administration. So the official numbers are 1% growth for Lake Mills. And then we looked at, well, what are the communities, the faster growing communities in southern Wisconsin doing? And if you think about like Verona or Waunakee or DeForest, they're growing at about 2.5% on an annual basis. And the table here does not include new industries, or our analysis here doesn't consider new industries. So this table shows kind of two potential ranges of populations based on those percentages there. If you could go to the next slide, please. And this graphic shows population on the x-axis, so we got that ranging from 5,000 people to 30,000 people, and then the corresponding peak flow to the wastewater plant on the y-axis there. And then in the boxes, we've got the various treatment plant processes at your existing site, and then the current population noted. So notice for influent pumping and screening, you're already at capacity today. At day zero, you have a capacity need. And then not that far down the line, you start hitting capacity needs for your other processes. And this doesn't even take into account the age and condition needs. This is purely from a capacity basis. If you go to the next slide, please.
Could I ask what time perspective this would be over? This x-axis is population, but based upon the projections of population, the time period of this is about what for this chart?
So I got that. So if you follow the DOA projections, which are only 1% annual, it's about 11,000 people in 40 years. And that, again, includes no industrial contributions.
So this would be easily 100 years using the DOA projections?
Well, I mean, yeah, it depends on if you're following DOA or not. And then in the higher growth scenario, we've got 17,000 in 40 years.
We went from early 2000s to today. We went from around 4,000 population to over 6,000 population. So we likely will grow faster than the DOA projections.
Our past rate of growth is about 1.25%. Yeah. The last 20 years, our growth rate was 1.25%. That's from those numbers are from the census, from the numbers that are in the comprehensive plan. Mm-hmm. The comprehensive plan is using a projected growth rate of 1.22%, as far as I understand. So this 2.5% to me is way out, why would the comprehensive plan document use one number, and why would we consider something so large in this other one? Yeah, more than 1%, but a high side maybe is 1.5%. Not, you can figure whatever you want, but what's realistic?
Yeah, I think you can certainly argue the point. I think growth begets growth in some regard, and there are opportunities that would certainly, if, for example, if development north of the interstate started, you will likely see rapid growth on that side. And so there are activities that could result in a higher level of growth than we've seen in the past, just due to more available land. We certainly are in a scenario right now where if more housing was available, we would see a higher rate of growth. There is a bottleneck of sorts, you could say, because we simply don't have the stock to accommodate more people in the city of Lake Mills right now. But there are not, homes don't remain on the market for very long. New homes get purchased basically immediately, and apartments lease up very quickly. We have one apartment building that's opening here in the next week or so that, I mean, it's only 8 units, but they basically have it leased before it's completed. So growth projections are difficult in that they can change based on what availability we have, and that is largely driven by whether we have development north of the interstate or not.
It depends on what kind of development too. I mean, if we're talking all housing, that's one thing. If we see more commercial and industrial, this is I guess my point is it's a really difficult number to work with. It may not just be the growth of the city, but it could be a particular industry or industries that come in that have a specific waste strength or something like that. So there's a lot of factors in addition to whether there's growth. It's what this plant will see, and so it's crystal ball stuff. But I think the point still remains that our capacity is going to be challenged here, and probably kind of going back to what Greg said about finding out about some of the issues before it happens, before the plant is built. I wouldn't be surprised that as we're doing this planning, there'll be other regulations that come into play that, make us take another turn or something like that. So, we're using the best information we have now. We're making some general assumptions. Whether they're absolutely right or not, hard to say.
This graph here shows the potential impact of industries or other commercial entities that might come into the city, and it kind of converts it to a population equivalent and shows how your capacity might be used for these types of facilities. So these were real examples from south central Wisconsin as far as how much flow and what the population equivalents were for a hospital. So that's shown in the first narrower green bar there, about 1,000 people population equivalent. And then an example, food packaging facility. So food industries have very heavy loads to wastewater plants, and this is on the low end, even though it's using about 3,500 population equivalents. This would be a smaller loading from a food facility. There's certainly facilities that would load 10 times that amount. So there's a huge range here as far as what facilities can discharge to wastewater plants. But I just thought that would be interesting to show, because these are kind of real examples of the types of industries that are in this area that there may be interest in coming here and how it would impact your capacity. If you go one slide forward, please. If we move that example food packaging facility to where you stand with your current population, you can see that it would chew up all the capacity for every process that you have, and you'd be maxed out on every process, and you'd have some processes where it would be beyond the existing capacity. So, what this is showing is that you would not have capacity today to accept a business of this type. Next slide. Okay. So how would you go about doing this on the existing site? This is just one strategy that we put together using aerobic granular sludge, which is a newer technology. There's been previous presentations on this over the past year. But this is a phased approach with 4 phases. And I'll just kind of walk briefly through each phase. We got an aerial photo of the existing treatment plant site here. Phase 1 is taking care of the really immediate needs at the plant, not necessarily expanding the capacity, but taking care of your most urgent needs like influent and screening for the capacities where DNR would say you need to do something because you're not meeting code requirements for capacity. And then phase 2 would actually expand the capacity of the plant. And that would be done by adding aerobic granular sludge reactors and adding additional solids processing such as dewatering or drying. And so phase 2 is shown in red here. The aerobic granular sludge would add treatment capacity by being constructed right alongside the existing oxidation ditches. It's a little hard to see here, but under the blue rectangles are the existing oxidation ditches. And then phase 3 would be an effluent pump station to the Crawfish River. That would solve your issue with the phosphorus limit. That would be a long-term compliance strategy for phosphorus and dealing with any potential other regulatory constraints from a continued discharge to Rock Creek. And then when needed, and this would be based on city growth and your capacity needs, phase 4 would be demolishing the existing oxidation ditches and constructing more aerobic granular sludge reactors in their place. And for the same footprint, you get much more treatment capacity. Let me think here. You would be basically doubling the capacity from phase 3 to phase 4. You're basically doubling your capacity by only using the footprint that's shown in blue there. So if we go to one slide forward, please. I've kind of got that shown graphically here as we walk through the first phases. So starting out in orange there in the first bar, that's your most urgent needs. Then you address capacity to get you up to that roughly 17,000 population equivalents by constructing the aerobic granular sludge system alongside the ditches. And then at phase 3, you'd build your effluent pump station, pump to the Crawfish. And then when needed, when you're approaching that limit of the purple bar there in the middle, then you would go to phase 4, demo the oxidation ditches, build more reactors, and that would get you up to 30,000 population equivalents within the footprint of your existing treatment tanks. That doesn't completely max out the parcel boundaries of the site. There is still some room to the south to expand a little bit more, but this would be kind of the near-term logical phase to kind of use the footprint that you're using right now.
When you say near term, this is like 50 plus years out in this chart here, right?
Depending on your growth rate.
Yes. So even at 2.5%, 40 years and 2.5% is what, 18,000?
Again, it would depend on if you do get any of those industries that come in, because
Yes.
that's a game changer, especially at the size that you're at. If you get a food industry that comes into a city of 1 million people, it's this much. If you were to have that same industry come to Lake Mills, it would be.
It's the city has a say in whether that industry comes or not.
Sure.
The
Yes.
city can say,
No.
thanks, but no thanks. That would really stress our wastewater system. We don't want to do that, right?
True.
Okay.
If the city wants to say no to industrial development and if they're not interested in that and the benefits that come with it, certainly, we certainly could, if a lower capacity plant would limit that type of growth. Now you have to weigh the benefits of that as far as employment, value, and benefit, to the city as a whole, is largely on an employment and jobs perspective versus capacity.
And I've got one more slide here, just next steps. So what we see as the logical next steps here, having gone through, what I just presented, is to, first we want to determine what, if any, federal funding the city can receive. And as Drake mentioned, we probably won't know that until very late this year or early next year. And then take that into account and evaluate the sewer rates and what impact that might have. Evaluate the benefits of that new site versus what we ultimately calculate as the ratepayer impacts. And then if the rate increase is acceptable at that point, if you feel like the benefits of a new site are worth it, then we proceed into the site selection for the new treatment plant. If it's determined that those rates would be prohibitive, then we would take the other fork in the road and continue evaluating a phasing strategy like what I was just going through to stay at the existing site. And then we would incorporate the phasing strategy into an updated rate study, and you could see what the impact would be on rates for that phase strategy.
Do we happen to know what level of federal funding would put us in the situation where the fork is determined? I mean, is there a number that would?
What's the initial investment in staying at the same site? It's north of 20 million, isn't it?
I don't have those numbers in front of me, and there's some flexibility there, right? I mean,
So, I mean, if you got enough federal funding that it was close, that the federal funding, if you got $44 million in federal funding, then you needed to come up with $15 million to fund the construction of a new plant on a new site, and you're going to spend $15 million on the existing site. Regardless, if those are similar, then it would likely be beneficial to take that federal money and build on a new site to have the most flexibility built into the plant and opportunities to do other things with that land as well. So it depends what amount of federal funding we get, and does that federal funding offset, create a similar, rate impact as staying on the same site would be. If they are similar, the technical benefits, factoring in unknowns in the future as far as, regulatory changes or the ability to be flexible with certain development that could seek to locate here. If it's the same cost to the end user, it would seem to lend itself to the more flexible option.
and I appreciate the discussion here, and I'm happy to answer any other questions, but this was everything that I had to present.
Hey, Travis, this is Greg Waters. I got a quick question about the existing site.
Yes.
It looks like when we go into phase 4, we lose the oxidation ditches in favor of the aerobic granular sludge type facilities. Do we need an oxidation ditch when we go into phase 4, or is that technology no longer useful with this new technology that we'd be using?
It's going away mainly because it takes up so much more space than the newer technology, and we're trying to minimize our footprint. And at that point, the structure itself is going to be deteriorating due to age. So certainly it wouldn't make sense to rebuild or put major investments back into those oxidation ditches at that point. They'll have served their purpose, and in my mind, it would be beneficial to move on to the newer technology that has a a much smaller footprint.
Could
Okay.
I
Thank
just
you.
add-
Thank you for your presentation, by the way.
Oh, you're welcome.
I would just add real quick, I'm sorry, real quick, that I believe when we were in Rockford touring their plant, they were actually taking a ditch out of service at that point, right? That they had reached a level where they could remove a ditch, the one on the far south side, I think they were taking out. Does that sound right?
I don't remember that detail, Paul, but
Okay.
that could be.
I know they were taking one out, but I don't know if it was, one for one. And the only, I'll repeat my mantra real quick here is now we're delaying, but we cannot stop. So I'll just keep saying that we're taking a look at some of these factors much more closely before we move forward. But again, we have to keep this thing going forward, not only because our existing plant is aging, but we do have, we're under the scrutiny, if you will, of the DNR. They have given us an extension or a variance, but if they see no activity, then they will limit that. So just, I don't want this to be viewed as let's just wait and see. It's still a we must keep moving forward situation.
So I have a question about that transition between Phase 3 and Phase 4. I think it's kind of a follow-up to Greg's question. What happens in that transition before Phase 4 is completely online?
Can we go back a slide or one more? Okay, so what's going to be happening is prior to Phase 4, the city's going to be growing, and you're going to be splitting flow between the existing oxidation ditches and the new aerobic granular sludge reactors that are shown
So
in
you're
red.
using both?
Yeah, you're going to be splitting both parallel processes.
Okay.
But before you've, maxed out your capacity, you'll start construction and you'll run all flow through the aerobic granular sludge reactors.
Got it.
Then you'll demo the ditches and build the new
Got it.
ones, and then you'll split flow again to the aerobic granular sludge reactors.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions, comments?
Thank you for the
All right,
report.
yep, thanks, everyone.
Thank you for the report. Very, very good, very thorough.
When decisions were made for the new plant, we did not have rate information surrounding that decision at all. So,
Yeah, and that's why we put together the footprint of what it would look like if we did stay on the existing site. Because staff is in agreement that a rate increase all at once that puts us immediately to the top of the state for rates is an unacceptable solution, regardless of any technical benefits. So that is the solution that we would have before us in order to get to where we need to be, and phase in those increases over time.
makes sense.
If nothing else, then we'll move on to item 9, discussion recommendation on authorization to bid TAP grant pedestrian connectivity project.
Hello. Greg, if you could fire up the presentation, please. Okay. So I'll just give a little background while he's firing it up. We've been working on this project. TAP grant stands for Transportation Alternatives Program. It's a DOT grant program since I think we applied in 2020. It was April 2020 that the council authorized applying for the grant. In January 2021, council accepted or authorized signing the state municipal agreement to accept the grant. I think, is this the first slide, Dave?
No, it's not.
Okay. Go forward one slide, please. Next one,
slide,
please. Okay. So this project that we applied for and were awarded a grant is essentially Sidewalk. It's 7 different segments of Sidewalk
It's just-
spread out all over the city.
This is-
Everything okay?
Yeah,
Oh.
we just have the map in a bigger slide, whereas
Oh.
you have
The presentation was created
Right.
since the packet went out.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, I see. Okay.
okay,
So I guess it's very noteworthy that all 7 of these segments were identified in the 2005 sidewalk plan as gaps, in various significance to be filled. I think that played a factor in why the city was awarded the grant, as we had been planning to fill these gaps for quite some time. Next slide, please.
Can I ask how these 7 segments were selected out of the long laundry list? Was there a particular reason why, or what was the criteria by which they were chosen?
Well, some of them, if you could go back one, actually, can I maybe just address, because I have slides for each individual one that I think would be helpful to show you the details of each one.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah. So the city was awarded $432,000 in federal grants. This program is an 80-20 program, so the city has to match 20%. It's about 6,000 feet of new sidewalk. The total estimated construction cost is $550,000. Very important that property owners will not be special assessed for this new sidewalk. Typically, if the city was doing a reconstruction project where there is no sidewalk and we're putting in new sidewalk, property owners would be special assessed for that. So that's a great benefit of getting this grant. Sidewalk improvements will meet current ADA requirements, so all this new sidewalk will be 5 feet wide, and all the curb ramps have very specific slopes that they have to meet. There will be some driveway replacements and grading on private property to cut this new sidewalk in. Generally, no curb will be replaced. There is a few small exceptions, but we're basically just putting new sidewalk behind existing curb inside the existing right-of-way. The limited disturbance outside the right-of-way is limited as much as we can, but we also want to make sure that people's yards and properties are left nicely. The TLEs, temporary limited easements, are almost complete. Very last steps in obtaining all of those to do the grading on the private property. And of course, if you recommend to move forward with this, or the council does at least, construction would be planned for fall of 2023 and spring of 2024. We're hoping that things can come together to advertise it sometime in June, which that would probably not allow enough time for a contractor to finish this construction season necessarily, or it would be not advantageous for prices to make a contractor squish it all into this construction season. So the plan currently is to allow some construction activities early 2024. Thank you. So this is where I get into each individual segment. The first segment is a short piece at County Highway V. It's completing the pedestrian connection to the Lake Mills Market commercial complex. So this is an important segment because right now it's the only grocery store in town. There's currently not a full off-road pedestrian connection to the market in that whole complex. As you can see from the aerial, this has been in the works for quite some time. The city extended sidewalk along V farther to the east to the point on the right end of that red line, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, something like that. And then there's some sidewalk that kind of winds around Reedwood State Bank and into the site. That was mandated as part of the Greenwood State Bank project. And then there's a pedestrian kind of corridor that goes right to the front door of Lake Mills Market that was also required as part of that development. So we're kind of completing this last little piece. Very important for this segment is this section here of Tyronia Park Road or County Highway V is essentially 4 lanes wide. And it's technically a mid-block, what's called a mid-block crossing, because there's not a street intersection right there. However, this crossing is going to be about as close to the pretty significant entrance and exit to the Lake Mills Market site as you can get. So we're trying to snug it up against what is the main vehicle generating traffic spot there, so that vehicles are coming to a stop and the pedestrians are crossing right there as they're leaving the market, or they're slowing down to turn in. What I'm showing on the right here is because of this mid-block aspect and also the width of the street, we were planning to put in a rectangular rapid flashing beacon, RRFB. The city has a couple of these, but you press a button and it flashes at you. It's very visual, the drivers see it, and the amount of the stop rate for for pedestrians at these is really, really high. People usually stop. So, and then because of the width of the road, we're also planning to have a mast arm out over the travel lane versus other options are just kind of posts on the side of the road. Any questions on that segment?
There will be two of these or one of these?
Yes, one, what you're seeing on there would face either direction on the road, so two posts, yeah. Next slide, please. The next one is County Highway V, I'm calling it the Badger Chevy area. There's two segments in red. The solid red is what is in our project, bridging some gaps. I'm showing here that there's a Holiday Inn that has been going through city approval processes. Is currently planned to start construction later this year, is what I'm told. So this would be extending sidewalk across this kind of commercial corridor. You can see some multifamily homes and things there too, towards this future Holiday Inn. The dashed red line is sidewalk that Holiday Inn project is going to install, and so they will kind of complete the connection in front of their site to the intersection of A and V. You might note that there will be a gap left there. That parcel, the camper business, is technically in the town still. And so we did not include that in our initial project and application. The Holiday Inn site was not really, that wasn't a project at the time. And so at that time, there wasn't really necessarily a need to extend it across, but I believe the city will be working on a way to get that.
Yeah, it's a town property on a county road, and so that is the difficulty with that location. But it certainly will be on our list to come to some sort of solution to fill that in the future. But it's neither our road nor annexed into the city.
And this is another segment that was picked similar to the previous one because it's a high pedestrian traffic generating area with commercial businesses, multifamily, residential, things like that.
Is there something that's going to be on A to cross where you start picking up the sidewalk on Holiday Inn Express? Is there?
Not to go east-west across A, no.
Across, okay.
Well, at least on the north side of V, there is not. That's kind of where it starts going up and over, and the slopes of the
Okay.
Get pretty steep there. But I don't know. I can't remember. I don't recall. Is there one on the south side of?
Yes.
Okay, so if you can go east-west on the south side of that intersection, though, along V.
Okay.
Next slide, please. Next segment, County Highway V again, farther to the east. This is a Fayetteville Park area, just connecting some gaps along existing residential neighborhoods, and then along County V again, past Fayetteville Park. I labeled some of the kind of future land uses that are contemplated there as well that will drive additional pedestrian traffic to this area. Fayetteville Park currently does not have any sort of formal pedestrian connection to it. You kind of basically just have to walk across grass to get to any of the facilities there, or the parking lot, of course, but there's no sidewalk that really kind of directs anybody to that property currently. Next slide, please. Next one was Marguerite Street. This is a small gap that there is sidewalk to the north on Prospect and the south on Fremont, but if anybody's trying to go east or west through this area, that's like I believe about a 1,500-foot stretch that you would have to kind of go north and then back south and then keep going, east or west. And so this would kind of bridge that gap so that you could move a little bit more freely east to west without having to zigzag quite as badly. It also had been city policy to, try to bridge these gaps and create sidewalk, on both sides, or certainly one side of residential roadways where possible, and this was possible. I would note that we originally were trying to put sidewalks on both sides of the street, but the south side of the street, when we dove into design, it wasn't going to be feasible. You're not allowed to exceed the longitudinal grade of the roadway with the sidewalk by ADA rules, and because of the way the private property is laid out and things, that we were going to be exceeding the roadway to try to fit that in. So we decided to just do one side of the roadway here. Next slide, please. This is another small gap on Pope Street and Prairie Avenue, where you have existing sidewalk in a residential neighborhood, where there's some, dead-end sidewalk that, would, I guess, make more efficient pedestrian travel kind of through this neighborhood. And again, this was one of those areas that was identified on the sidewalk plan to be closed, this gap to be closed. Next slide, please. Reed Street is very similar. There's a small section of Reed Street here that does not have any sidewalk, where people would have to go a block or two either direction to kind of move along Reed Street unless they wanted to walk in the road. And there is sidewalk at O'Neill and at Louise Street, and so just kind of bridging this one short block gap here with a section of sidewalk.
And this is one side only?
Correct.
And why not the second side?
Because this is, I would say that the shortest amount of sidewalk to kind of bridge that gap. If you note on the south side of Reed Street, there's not like a sidewalk stub on the south side to connect to, and the sidewalk on the, what would it be, west side of O'Neill Street is quite a ways to the south. I believe that was the main reason. We never really dove into design on the south side either, so there could also have been some cost implications. Sorry for the wishy-washy could statements, but we've been doing this for almost 2 years now, so I'm trying to go back to some of the decision making. But I believe the main reason is it was just going to take quite a bit more sidewalk for the same benefit if you went on the south side as well. So you would have to go quite a ways to the west to kind of join that up. Next slide, please.
Hey, Brandon.
Yes, Greg.
This is Greg Waters online. When I look at the profile on Reed Street, it seems like there's a lot of up and down on the sidewalk. And I was hoping that sidewalks could be a little bit more straighter so that when kids are riding their bicycles, they're not going up and down like a roller coaster. Is there a way to smooth that out and not have such a profile that has that up and down type of situation?
I'll have to look into that. I would say, in general, we try to make the sidewalk as flat as we can. Oftentimes, those grade changes are required to make the driveways not be really onerous for the vehicles. That that if you are entering the driveway, it's not going to be a crowned road where you're kind of going down and then coming back up to a steep driveway. So a lot of times, and you would notice this on like Main Street here, there's a slight dip in the sidewalk.
That's exactly why I brought it up. Yeah.
Okay.
Main Street.
Yeah.
You see people that are on there with their bicycles and stuff, and it's just up and down. And I even run it. And when I run it, it's like, man, I wish this was a flat sidewalk.
Yeah.
So.
Usually it's the up and down is dictated either by driveway slopes or having to come down at an intersection because of how tight you have to have quite flat curb ramp areas. So if it's higher as you're approaching the intersection, oftentimes you have to dive it to get kind of close down to the road grade at the intersection. That would be my best, I guess, example of why it is the way it is right now. I'm sure you try to make it as flat as possible. I just wanted to throw that out there. Let's make an effort to see what we can do to flatten it out as much as we can. Okay. Last segment is State Highway 89 to the south. The red line is the extent of what we're proposing. I would note that that multifamily development is under construction right now, and so the section of that red line from where the sidewalk currently is to the eastern side of that development is being installed as part of that development. And so then once we bid our project, this would connect all the way to St. Paul's. One of the noteworthy elements here to me is that this sidewalk would be the future sidewalk on the south side of Unshaven Lane. If that were to ever go, there's a road right away through there, and this sidewalk should be able to remain. And then also a component of this is actually on St. Paul's property because it felt pretty silly to keep the sidewalk just at the edge of the road right away and leave a 60, 70-foot section to the main driver of any pedestrian traffic down that direction. And so I've spoken with the school principal, and, they are very much aware of this, I think appreciative of it, and the sidewalk on the school property will be theirs to maintain moving forward. And then, of course, at one point, there was potential that there was going to be a school there as well, so that would have provided a nice pedestrian connection to the school. Still might be. I believe that might be the last slide. Yeah. Any questions?
Question.
Yeah.
Have the property owners on Pope, Reed, Margaret Street, have they all been notified regarding the installment of a sidewalk? And do we have any issues regarding their interest or lack thereof?
Yeah, so we had a public information meeting probably a year and a half ago where everybody was invited specifically, that, was on the city website, letters were sent out. We had a presentation similar to this, but a little bit more detail with like what was happening with driveways and things like that. And then also almost all properties required some sort of TLE, temporary limited easement for the grading. And so they had conversations with the city, hired a right-of-way acquisition specialist to talk to them, and everybody essentially has signed the TLE documents at this point.
We'll send a notification too after contract award and a conversation with the whoever wins the bid for after they give us kind of their schedule for things. We'll send out notification on when they can expect to see work and estimated times of completion, so they kind of know when the impact will be most prevalent for them. Because I wasn't here when the public information meeting occurred, but some time has passed since then. So they'll get notified that work is upcoming after we have that schedule firmed up.
Any other questions? So I believe this is the first time the Public Works Board has actually seen a map view of this project. I know it was described verbally at least once, but I don't recall it ever being at the Public Works Board. So can you talk about how this was developed? How were these particular projects selected? Who was involved with that process?
Mm-hmm. So that would have been around April 2020 is when council approved to apply for the grant.
And at that point, was the scope, which sidewalks, was that part of that decision? Or was at the council level, or is that just, yes, we'll apply for a grant?
The discussion of which section of sidewalks to include was more at the staff level initially, guided by the sidewalk plan.
Yes.
And then at the point where council approved to apply for the grant, these specific segments were discussed at that meeting.
Okay. Another question I had was, this is an 80-20 grant, and I maybe have asked this in the past, but I don't remember the answer. Is it the city's choice to not assess for the 20% part, or is that a requirement by
I think
some other body?
we're barred from special assessing as a requirement of receiving the grant.
Yeah, okay. I thought that was the case, but I wasn't 100% sure. Thank you. And my last question here was, this was started in, what year did you say, 2020?
We applied in 2020. The SMA, State Municipal Agreement, was approved by council early 2021, January 2021.
So this just takes a long time with these TAP grants?
Yes, so it's a full DOT process. You have to have extremely detailed curb ramp details. There's lots of reports that have to be approved by various people. specifically the last, maybe let's call it 6 months or so, it's been the TLE acquisition process. You have to create an actual plat, file that with the county, send letters to all the property owners, negotiate the prices for the easements. It just takes some time, yeah.
All right. Anything else, anybody? So on our agenda, this is a discussion / recommendation. Was there a proposed motion in our packet?
We're transitioning away from written motions and moving towards resolutions. So you'll see a draft city council resolution included in your packet there. So if you're interested in making a recommendation to proceed with authorizing the bid, the motion would be a motion to recommend adoption of the city council resolution included in your packet. So verbal motions rather than written motions with a resolution, a document being approved by the motion instead of. So it's a slight change, but something that we think is a little bit more streamlined.
All right. If anybody have any further discussion, if not, a motion would be in order.
So it's resolution 23XX?
Yep, it should be titled authorizing city, so you'd be recommending that the city council approve the resolution authorizing the city manager to bid the TAP grant pedestrian connectivity project.
So move.
Second.
All right. Greg Polachek has motioned and Mary Schmager has seconded that. Any further discussion? If not, roll call, please.
Ms. Schmager?
Aye.
Mr. Picard?
Aye.
Mr. Waters?
Aye.
Mr. Polachek?
Aye.
Motion passes 4-0.
Okay, moving on then. Thank you. Item 10, discussion recommendation on comprehensive plan. And we have a small 180-some page document in our packet and somebody to discuss it.
For that, I apologize, but try to share a screen with you, and
There's a shorter summary memo as well for the specific transportation.
so we're going to pivot and not go page by page?
I have page-by-page notes. No. Surprising. Just joking. I really do. Okay. But I actually kind of do.
Okay. So I am going to work from the brief memo, which is about 3 pages, that kind of highlights some of the components of the comprehensive plan. Just introduction, I'm Dustin Wolf. I'm your consulting planner. The comprehensive plan is a document that municipalities by statute adopt generally every 10 years. We ran into a little wrinkle with COVID. Wasn't really a great time to undertake a citywide plan document where you want people to get together and communicate. So we pushed it off a little bit and began it last year. The Plan Commission has been working very diligently with the city staff and planners to put together an update to the 2009 plan, which is what's been brought forward to you. As a part of that process, we conducted some public involvement that included identified focus groups. Those were groups identified by city staff and city council to meet with. We conducted a citywide survey. So you'll see peppered throughout the document of the feedback we received from those entities as a part of the planning process to inform how the community has been doing just day to day on task responsibilities and what is important to them and that they feel should be reflected in this planning document. So the memo that's been provided to you really does focus on what relates to the Public Works Board. But that certainly doesn't mean that there aren't kind of secondary, tertiary issues that are, of course, important on development and growth within the document for you. Come on now. Technology is never cooperative when you need it most. So early on in the document, in kind of what we call the background sections, talk about some of the summary of what the focus groups, general public comment, and community survey informed us. And one of the things it said as it relates to utilities and community facilities is there's general concern about the cost of utilities in consideration of future needs and facility improvements. I think you spent a fair amount of conversation about that earlier tonight, but again, the public's aware of it. They recognize that there are certainly needs that have to be evaluated, priorities that have to be made. I think one of the more important ones, and this isn't directed specifically at public works, but it's that the city needs to improve communication about public works projects throughout the process of planning and implementation. And I bring this up, this isn't a scolding by any stretch. It was the public telling the city, we want to hear more from the city, generally on everything. And they called out public works because people want to know when projects are planned, and they aren't, well, as hard as we strive to try to make sure everybody's informed, I think it's a nice reminder that we always have to work hard at this, whether it's a sidewalk project in front of someone's house, a wastewater treatment plant, which is a big issue, or a roadway project. People want to be kept in the loop, want to be kept in conversation about what's going on through ultimately shovels in the ground.
Dustin, as you move through the document, if you could just reference for them what page of the
Oh, I'm
PDF
sorry.
you're on.
Yeah, I am. That was on page 19. We're going to jump to chapter 2, which is kind of agricultural, natural, and cultural resources, page 223 of the plan document itself. Again, all of this is available online for people to review.
223.
So in this section, because we are talking about natural resources, really this focuses for Public Works on stormwater management, best management practices. And this reiterates, I'm certainly not going to read word for word here, but the to continue obviously requiring stormwater management, always evaluating what type of stormwater management practices should be incorporated within projects and development. Obviously, the natural resources here, the waterways, Rock Lake, are such important assets to the community. We certainly hear from Rock Lake Improvement Association and the county about the importance of protecting this important asset. And then in here, and I know you've talked about this on roadway projects in the past, but it's been brought forward into the comprehensive plan document, is trying to reduce impermeable surfaces. One of the things that can be done is evaluating how wide do our roadways really need to be. This does not make a specific recommendation on that all roads should be narrowed, but it does talk, it is something that the Public Works Board and the city at large should evaluate on how wide do specific roadways need to be as projects are undertaken. When a roadway project is undertaken, there isn't a mandate that says it has to be built in exactly the same way it has been constructed in the past. This may be something you want to look at. Some roadways may be able to get a little bit narrower, have larger terraces, and you can see the ability to integrate specific stormwater management improvements within those terrace areas to help with runoff issues that might be impacting certain neighborhoods, certain areas of the community. I'm sure you've seen this used extensively in other communities. It hasn't been something we've done here regularly, but this is bringing it forward as something to be evaluated. Again, these aren't mandates, but we do know their importance, especially as you get closer and closer to the lake or to the creeks and rivers. Another comment here on 224 is, again, integrating stormwater management facilities into development. We certainly do require stormwater management with all new development. I would say sometimes the development is great about really having stormwater features that really seem natural as a part of a project, and others that are obviously just a stormwater management facility because we need to address runoff. This is trying to make that recommendation that we should take a little more look at some of these areas when possible to make sure they look more like natural features rather than just a pond on the corner of a property. Of course, if you have questions on any of this, certainly we'll try to answer them for you. I'm trying to be cognizant of time here, and so kind of hitting high points on some of these.
Do you want to wait till the end, or do you want to go through all
No,
of
if there's something that you have that we've just discussed, I certainly would like to hear about it. And I'm also going to look at the Public Works staff over here if there's things that they can respond to.
Well, I have a question, but it kind of takes us back to maybe chapter 1.
Okay.
And that's just an overarching set of questions regarding, what the assumptions are that I feel a little bit like the comprehensive plan speaks generally to everything everybody wants in every community a little bit, and not necessarily the actual specific elements that are unique and required and necessary and required, like the word required in Lake Mills. And I'll use, when you talk about stormwater management is one great example where if we wanted to be a community that was hanging our hat on, we are going to be super green, or we are going to be the community that's a 15-minute walk community, so that would be transportation maybe, or our sidewalks and other methods of transportation, golf carts, whatever it may be kind of a focus area. But stormwater management, because we're in that section, kind of is one of those where we've had some conversation. We've had great representation. Susan Trier has done a wonderful job advocating for permeable surfaces, reduced surfaces as an example. But it, along with many other things in here, it takes dollars and focus. And I feel a little bit as if we're putting all of our money everywhere because we want all things for everything, versus really putting our vision, that's why I'm back on chapter 1 and maybe even the I points, on what is it that we are going to say is like the top X number of things that Lake Mills is going to be known for. And it could be stormwater management because we have this beautiful lake, and I do appreciate it. I'm learning about our Lakeshore Drive, I think will be on the docket in a few years, which is very, very, very important because it is like right on the adjacent shoreline of the lake. And this reads a little bit like we want to consider all of this, but not that we are going to require that when you are in a certain area, let's just pretend it's Lakeshore Drive, that we are going to expect and require and demand that we have permeable surface, like a permeable blacktop, or that our sidewalk will actually be made with a mesh with gravel in it rather than our traditional concrete. And so it's just a general observation regarding a concern about wanting a lot of these wonderful things for a community, but not necessarily knowing, because we're coming up on sidewalks as our next topic of conversation, and I'm trying to be, how do we set criteria and really, really clear focus to ensure that we know how the next round of leaders at the table will be making decisions or assessing the assumptions for the decisions to change those over time as things change. And so it's just a general observation that I wanted just to share, and it's in chapter 2, and I have even transportation. Our words are really great, but I'm curious to know how the planning committee really feels are the absolute essentials, the assumptions, what are the goals and objectives, and how we're going to deliver to those, so then we point the money in the right direction and our decisions in the right direction as a Public Works Board. That was kind of a long comment,
It's
but
okay.
I'm hoping
I think your point is well taken, that yes, a comprehensive plan, which has historically been known as a general plan, is general. It talks about a lot of things at like the 5,000-foot level. It talks about what's important. You get feedback from stakeholders as to what they value and some things that they hold dear and want to see come to fruition. I think the Plan Commission was challenged with, it doesn't want to make mandates. It wants to leave it to the other communities, whether it's the Parks Board or the Public Works Board or the City Council, to be the one that's going to be making those mandates. It's going to talk about what's important, what the public is telling us, why we want to do these things. But when it comes to directing policy, I think they wanted to leave it to the other groups, and I'm looking at Mr.
Okay,
Daly.
that's fair, that's fair.
Yeah, the trend throughout the process that I've participated in with the Plan Commission has been a trend more towards general language, encouragement of certain amenities, certain policies, but not using the comprehensive plan to set or mandate specific policies, rules, requirements. So the trend has been away from more specific language and more towards more general language of we like the idea of this, we would like to encourage this, we think this should be explored, we think that we may want to pursue additional more specific policy documents or policy positions in the future, but the comprehensive plan has not been the tool that the Plan Commission wants to use to implement those specific policy goals.
Yeah, and I'm not sure I was jumping to policy, but I was being more critical and guiding, perhaps. Maybe that's what I was, because this is hard to afford to do all of this, and it's all important, and many of our citizens would prioritize these in all different orders. And so I was just trying to see, I was just feeling, and again, knowing what our next agenda item is, like how, is there something that is more specific to the vision of Lake Mills that would put some of these at a different level of specificity here in the comprehensive plan versus it being more broad? That was just an observation and a question.
And
I'm going to use that as a springboard.
We could do that.
I'm sorry.
We could do that. We could choose to be more specific and more, and call out specific things that the city wants to prioritize going into the future. We could do that.
I feel there's a fair amount of that in this document already. Maybe I'm a little too close to it. We heard overwhelmingly from the public that responded to the community-wide survey about connectivity within the community. Now, a little bit of that is roadways, but primarily their focus is on non-motorized mobility, non-motorized connectivity. They told us that it's their opinion that it's not very easy to walk or bicycle across the community. Some areas of the community are better than others, and the discussion you just had on TAP grants, I think, really kind of speaks to that. There are areas that there are problems. The public told us they expect that all areas of the community, and especially new development, will be connected to other areas of the community, whether that's institutional areas, right? Schools and churches, civic buildings, neighborhoods connected to neighborhoods, shopping areas connected to neighborhoods. If you live on the east end of the community, and I'll say now the south end of the community, right, connectivity is a little more challenging than if you live in the historic core of Lake Mills. So direction that came out of this from the public was, we expect this to happen. They're telling us that, and we've brought that into the plan, and some of the things that have been brought forward is, I'm showing here a graphic of a potential bike boulevard. While it's important to make sure that you can walk safely on roads, maybe some parts of the network will be better or more focused on bicycle connectivity, right? There are certain roads that cross the community that have slower traffic speeds and lower volumes, and those, one or two of those roads, north, south, or east, west, might be a great opportunity to implement a bike boulevard. Now, it's very difficult for the Plan Commission or through the comprehensive plan process to absolutely select which roads those should be, right? There's a lot more scrutiny looking at the city's engineer, right? There's a boots on the ground level that needs to be done. There's a public involvement component that needs to be done with that. But a bike boulevard is a roadway that is equally shared by bicycles and vehicles. And it is like constructed in a way or rehabilitated in a way that makes it more appealing for bicycles and safer for bicycles to be in the travel lanes, right? Again, that's not going to be every road, and so you don't want to write it as being, we're going to do this everywhere. If everything's special, nothing's special. It's about earmarking maybe a couple of roads that are going to be designed with that in mind as an end goal, right? to integrate them better. Better signage, better on-pavement markings, right? Certain intersection improvements to facilitate the movement of bicycles across them, right? So I think that is something that absolutely came out of this process that kind of leads to what you were saying. It doesn't say anything specific. I think there it does. It says, now, it means more further study is required for it, but the public is saying to the community, and then I will say to the Public Works Board in that vein, we expect development to be connected. We expect sidewalks, we expect the community to go after grants to get, to try to fill in some of these expensive things, because the city can't pay for it all of its own coffers, right? So I think it does some of those things in very strategic ways without dictating policy and without mandating specific roadways that haven't had the certain level of study to see, is that the appropriate roadway to try to do this with? Does that make sense?
Yes.
But your point is taken.
Dustin,
Yes.
this is Greg Waters, and what you just said makes a lot of sense, and I read the same thing when I was looking at the results from the comprehensive survey. Some of the terminology is a bit confusing, like a bike boulevard. I think when we're talking about bike boulevards, the public is thinking that we're going to pull cars off the road and it's only going to be a bike street. And of course, it's more of a shared situation where the road is shared with bicyclists and cars. Is there another term that maybe doesn't seem to have that negative connotation that we're going to pull cars off the street? Is there something like a shared boulevard or a different term that maybe would make it a little bit more palatable from the public standpoint?
I will say that Bike Boulevard is kind of the national industry standard for what it is. The markings are sharrows, right? Shared arrows on the pavement to show that bicycles will be in the travel lanes. And again, there's a certain level of study that has to occur to see which roadways would be most appropriate for it. So I think we could talk, I don't know, branding or packaging or public relations as a component of this. But yes, there's a whole industry standard when it comes to bike boulevards, and
I just see that there's some confusion on the topic of what is a bike boulevard, and maybe we need to educate the public on that. But when people hear that term, they're thinking that we're pulling cars off the road, and that's not the case.
It's a very important note, Mr. Waters. That is not the intention, but it is to raise the level of awareness of bicycles being able to utilize the travel lanes as well. And again, this isn't something you're going to do on Highway 89. This is going to be on a secondary, tertiary road where you're going to say, we are going to invest in making these handful of routes really outstanding for bicycles to travel on, right, as well as cars.
Might there be a prominent place to display a definition of bike boulevard within the plan? And maybe it already exists, or call it out perhaps more strongly about what exactly this entails, and that it is a shared route and not, as Mr. Waters said, removing cars from the roadway, but integrating bicycles into the plan, the road, the way the road operates.
Absolutely get some supplemental graphics to incorporate. There's always the text, and I know reading text can be a little bit dry. We try to make sure that the content is there for someone who wants to read it. And I will say these are sort of jumping off points on for the document where it sometimes does need to direct you to a place where there is just more information available. We're limited. The comment was made. The document's already 200 pages with a lot of graphics, but more pages is more pages, right? So I think we can absolutely look at these things to see, are we communicating the information in the best way?
Yeah, because to me it seems like it's a big positive, but we don't want to lose that positive by making people think that it's actually a negative. We want to point out, why is it a positive?
Absolutely. And again, in this chapter on transportation, we talk about the importance of sidewalks and connections, and I'm sure many of you have been here as Public Works Board members. Anytime you special assess for sidewalks, it's probably the most packed the room ever gets, right? But
Yep.
we have the public, you have a very young community. When you look at the demographics of your community, it's young, it's people with families, and they want to be able to walk and bike throughout the community. They have that expectation that where there isn't sidewalks, there will be soon, right? And that's always a challenge, but has always been a city policy that new development will have sidewalks. So, I think that hurdle was overcome years ago, and with the TAP grant you just talked about, the value and importance of going after federal dollars to try to fill in the gaps that exist in certain areas of the community. You can scroll ahead to page 4-7, and again, this is kind of the list of transportation goals, objectives, and policies. And when we say policies, it's
There's the word.
it's in the happier sense of these are things that we're striving for and to be evaluated by the city council ultimately. But again, providing alternative to vehicle options, that's always an important one, especially for young community and for aging population, that you don't have to take a car everywhere. Developing an official map. So this is listed under transportation. It's also under community facilities. An official map is a statutory document. You don't have one, but it earmarks where future roads are planned, so right-of-way dedication can occur when development happens. This can be especially important in your growth areas, your extraterritorial areas. You can also earmark areas where you're going to plan for future parks, and I will say future utility improvements. So if there's areas where you may have wells or water towers or wastewater treatment plants, that you're outlining them on this official document. So should development happen in that area that is contrary to the official map, that you have the teeth to prevent something from happening. I think that's the more important one, you don't want to see development happen where you're not, where it's in conflict, where you need specific utility improvements. And there's a little more on that in the implementation chapter, but that's kind of the high discussion of the official map. Again, prioritizing that interconnection for pedestrians and bicycles to the important destinations around the community. Moving ahead, key streets and road corridors, and we talk about CP Avenue here. I'm just going to hit a couple of the high ones. I think over the last 6-7 years, we really talked about the value of CP Avenue. It was really important to talk about in predating the 89 reconstruction, because there are not a lot of continuous east-west routes throughout the community for, obviously for moving vehicles, but for public safety as well, to make sure that when one route isn't available, there are multiple others. We bring these things up in this document in case you do decide to go after grants, that we've highlighted the importance of it. These are also things that are on your transportation plans, but having in the comprehensive plan also illustrates how key these routes are to the community. And then on 413, again, continue implementing the Transportation Alternatives Program. Talked about that earlier tonight, but an excellent opportunity. Very successful with the recent grant, but to continue looking at that. And the other one is consider pursuing Safe Streets and Roads for All grant program. This is kind of the rebranding of the Safe Routes to School, but it has a broader opportunity now. And there is $5 billion appropriated over the next 5 years for this. There is a process. You do have to have an action plan before you can then have implementation plans. But again, there are dollars available for infrastructure improvements, intersections, new roads, connections, demonstration programs, educational programs, et cetera. So I think it's something that we're going to want to explore. A lot of communities around the country are dipping their toe into this. And like I said, it's available for the next 5 years so far, and it's well funded. Anything on that before we move?
I've got a question on infrastructure.
Yes.
It's not really, it's actually one of the earlier, it's in the survey. I took a look at I read the whole thing, not just the plan, the comprehensive plan, but the community survey, and I was really impressed with a lot of the answers that people gave. One thing that stood out to me, which I sort of knew I didn't know it was that high, and that was the statistic, 70% of the respondents do not work in the city. And that's, I mean, I knew because I split my time between Milwaukee and Madison, so I kind of intuitively got that, but I didn't know it was 70%, so that's quite a bit. But then, how does that relate to us? It relates in terms of infrastructure. If you apply it to infrastructure improvements, things that we deal with as a Public Works Board, I thought that question 20, which I remember answering, talked about the future industrial business park land and where should that go. And 32% said, well, it's obvious it should go on the north side, which of I-94. However, obviously that area is lacking in public infrastructure. It's something that we would be, as a city, dealing with in the future. However, what I really thought was important was almost 28% respondents felt that we should not develop another additional business park. And I thought that's almost 32%. That's not something that should be taken lightly. And so that begs the question, what is the current inventory of available parcels in our existing business park? And I'd like to see some kind of a breakdown of that, because a number of the comments that, like at the bottom of the survey, talked about that, said, well, there's plenty of parcels that could be looked at. So I just think some more information needs to be flushed out on that, and how does that impact our infrastructure and potential projects that come to this board here?
Just a quick answer, I'd say that there's 3 city-owned lots in the industrial park right now, and then probably another 3 to 4 privately owned that would likely be interested in selling or developing that. So
Yep.
half a dozen lots within the industrial park of varying sizes and capabilities.
Yeah, and if I can add, one of the issues with the industrial park, again, for those of you who have long memories here, and I'm looking at, Dwayne, and the industrial park that you have here was not built on the best land. It had a lot of lowland, a lot of wetland issues, and so while there are acreage that Mr. Daly referenced, some of them are heavily impacted by wetlands. The other issue is they're small parcels.
Right.
Put together. Today's business that is looking to locate in a community doesn't want a 5-acre parcel or a 3-acre parcel, which had been the case decades ago. They want a 20-acre parcel.
Right.
That need you can't fill. You don't have that ability. So that's a considerable issue to evaluate, which is why the north side has been the area that has been evaluated and I'll say recommended. It was a part of TID 8 and the Plan Commission kind of bringing that forward again. I'm showing the map here on the north side. Sadly, these maps aren't really meant to be looked at on the 11 by 17 page. They're really meant to be zoomed in or large wall size. But that growth area to the north is something that the city has been planning for decades.
Oh, I know that, and I realize that.
Very well taken. That
I realize that, but I was surprised at the number of people who don't want that. And I think that should not be ignored. That's all.
Yeah, I think there is an opportunity, some of it is public education as well, in that when you're talking about development and growth, industrial or business or certain uses are high value,
Yep.
low service demand.
Right.
And so when you're looking at, do you want to, when you're looking at spreading out property tax burden or bringing more resources in to improve or expand services for residents, that, single-family home development can bring in great value, but it's also an immense amount of infrastructure in order to make it work. And so if you're looking for, smaller footprints but high value that does not demand as much service, as far as, more roadway, needing additional police officers, additional emergency services, they can provide you with additional tax base without having to have as high of a burden on residents. So there is a piece there that perhaps not everyone thinks about when they're thinking about whether to pursue business development.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
One second. We're going to flip to page 5-8. There's a lag on the screen. So again, goals, objectives, policies from the utilities and community facilities chapter. Again, encouraging more compact development within the city. There's been a focus from the Plan Commission to focus on infill development before growing outward at the edges, and then making sure we're focusing on developing the areas that are easily served by utilities. This isn't saying, high density, it's just infrastructure is expensive, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that later, about how can we help pay for infrastructure while having managed growth. Here, another policy is to not extend utilities as you have without annexation, right? So to continue, if someone wants your utilities, that they're going to be a part of the community. Again, we have this official map conversation in here, which is, again, a really important document, I think, for a community like yours. The other one is imposing impact fees on new development. So this doesn't impact existing residents or existing homes here, existing development here. It is making sure we do this with the park fees, but you don't have a transportation impact fee. And that is a fee that single-family, multifamily would be paying to help with system upgrades where necessary as it relates to development impacts. So new development would pay that. It's not something that's kind of retroactive. It doesn't apply to those who are already here, but it does help defray some costs that you take on as a community because of new development coming in. So it's something to be evaluated. We have, again, on major public utility recommendations, construction of a new wastewater treatment plant or improvements to the existing wastewater treatment plant. Decisions being made because it does impact growth. It does impact the ability to attract new employers to your community. It does impact the ability to serve existing employers in the community, right? Based on the presentation I heard a little earlier. So decisions do have to be made there one way or the other, and if certain decisions are made, it may impact your growth areas accordingly. So, and then this is a carryover, consider creation of a stormwater management utility. And we have heard over and over from stakeholders how important stormwater management issues are. They can be expensive to implement. Stormwater utilities have been implemented throughout the state by communities to make sure that dollars are being generated to make those necessary improvements to address runoff issues and to protect natural resources. So, again, these are... Yes.
On that, create a stormwater management utility, you just outlined several reasons why it makes sense, and then several reasons why it's very costly and how it has an impact on our tax base and things like that. I guess I would like to see that word create change to the word review.
Absolutely.
Because create, of course,
Sounds like a mandate versus.
certain action.
Yes. We'll
Great.
make that edit.
It's a financially tough thing to do.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, there are many items here that
It
are.
seems reasonable to review it at this point, but,
Sure.
I mean, we need to understand all the costs that go into creating such a utility and the ramifications on our tax base for doing
Right.
that.
Right. We will make that edit. So the next one is on page 630, and it talks about use of TIF, and again, it talks about it in chapter 7 as well, in economic development. So tax increment financing is the most robust economic development tool that municipalities have available to them in Wisconsin. You don't have the ability to collect local sales tax and such, so this one is kind of the largest, biggest bang for your buck, if you will. And you've used it successfully from development of the industrial park that you have, redevelopment at the 89 and V area, the development that you're seeing or redevelopment that you're seeing down on Sandy Beach and South Main Street. So we've used it successfully. There's another TID in downtown, and there's one on the north side to attract development to the north side. One of the issues that comes into play with housing growth, and I think the community has talked at length about housing affordability and attracting new single-family residential growth. The biggest issue is the cost of infrastructure right now. We spent a lot of time with the developers and real estate agents as a part of this process early on to hear from them. There once was a time when a developer could come in and they could just develop a subdivision, and they could be profitable developing a subdivision, and they could sell off lots to multiple builders to come in and build on those lots. Those days are gone, and in most communities, builders develop the lots only so they have something for their builders to build. The cost of infrastructure is such that generally on a single-family lot, it's somewhere between $60,000 and $70,000 per lot to put the infrastructure in front of it, so you can then put a house on it. One of the problems you have in certain communities is that the price of the lot generally isn't much more than the cost to put the infrastructure in it. So in essence, they're only platting lots to put a house on, and they don't want to plat more lots than would be necessary than they can build on, which then leaves you in a problem where you're not getting enough inventory. One of the tools that could be utilized, and it's something to evaluate, is whether or not the city would evaluate using tax increment financing to fund the infrastructure, because that's aside from the road surface, is generally a 60 to 90 year investment that could be paid off in under 20 years by the single-family residential on top of it. It is a bigger conversation than can be had here. It is certainly something that the council needs to grapple with, and they need to talk to the developers that have been developing in the community. And I will say, Tyrannina Point on the south end did get the benefit of some tax increment financing help for Mud Lake Road improvements, okay? So it's not like it hasn't been used in the past, but this is to utilize it to encourage single-family growth within the community. It is happening. I will say your neighboring communities are doing this. They are working with developers who will commit to platting a certain number of lots and building on a certain number of lots over a 5 or an 8 year period. If there's some sort of assistance on defraying the cost of the infrastructure itself. Because otherwise they have to go out and borrow for it, they have to take on all the risk, and they're willing to take on the risk of building the houses, but the cost of the infrastructure is what makes it less palatable to them. It's a bigger conversation than can be had here, but it is something to explore because it does have public works implications associated with it. Any questions on that one? That's a very kind of detailed component to evaluate, but
Yeah, I think
talk
for-
about it in that
I think
sense.
for
here.
reference, the most recent, the next 18 lots in the Brookstone subdivision for 18 new homes was just under $1 million for infrastructure costs. So that's just a reference of something recently we've seen that can inform you a little bit about what development, what it takes to develop single-family housing. And that, right, Brandon was stating it didn't, that number doesn't include everything.
Is that road, sewer, water, sidewalk?
Sewer, water, sidewalk, curb,
Yep.
gutter.
Stormwater.
But not like the electric utility costs and
Okay.
things like that.
Any further questions or comments? I have one, I think, on page 9-10. Yes. So right in the middle of that, for champions, it's got Public Works Board, and the recommendation is periodically update the comprehensive outdoor recreation plan.
That would be a typo. Sorry there. But there is in this table, this is kind of the culmination of recommendations in one place, assigning champions and key support entities. Some of the things that are on there is the sidewalk plan, the transportation plan. Those things are called out in here. Yes, the outdoor rec plan, that must be a typo because it should be the Parks Board. This table is kind of intended to be the one-stop shop of what are we trying to get accomplished? And it's important to note, off of the last plan, you had a lot of things accomplished. So a lot of boxes were checked over the last, 13 odd years, 14 years. This plan isn't etched in stone. It can be, it certainly can be amended depending upon conditions, priorities of the community. I think some of the things that came out of this that were really important was more communication from the city to the public about a lot of issues. They certainly the public wants more, shareholders want more input. They want to hear from the city. So a lot more micro surveys, small surveys about specific issues to get feedback from them. And again, just higher level of communication. That doesn't mean that they're unhappy with the way things are going. They just want to be more informed. With that, I know I've been up here a little while, and so.
Thank you.
If there are specific other recommendations or changes you want made, we would ask you that you submit them to the staff so we can get them incorporated. We'll be going back to the Plan Commission at the end of the month, hopefully to kind of button up the draft document that can go through the public review period towards adoption.
So at this point, is anybody looking for a Public Works Board recommendation on this, or?
There's been a few notations throughout that Dustin can make. You can simply say that you've completed your review, and those notations you have no further comment beyond those. If you would choose to, you could make a formal recommendation that those pieces of the plan be incorporated and adopted. It may not be, it's not necessary. You can say it was reviewed, you made some suggestions, those suggestions Dustin will make and call out to the Plan Commission. But we don't need, it doesn't have to be formal if you don't want it to be. But if you do have action that you want to make in a formal motion, you are certainly welcome to.
I'll leave that up to the rest of the board, but I certainly want to thank Dustin and thank city staff for bringing this to the Public Works Board, which maybe, it's not a requirement, I don't think, of any state law or anything or city ordinance, so thank you for bringing it to us. So if any board member would like to make any motion or just leave this as a simple, I like the word, not consensus, but where you.
Confirmation?
No,
Confirmation.
We checked the box.
We all agree by unanimous agreement, unanimous consent, will agree to have provided our input and reviewed it and provided our input. Okay, if everybody's happy with that, we'll move on. Thanks, Dustin.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dustin.
Next is number 11, discussion recommendation on sidewalk policy, another small topic.
The items that are included are pulled forward from the last meeting. The one item that was added is at the top there, sidewalk criteria. There were some questions about why in the past sidewalks weren't always installed, and then kind of some evaluative, there we go, decision points on when sidewalks are being considered. You don't need to come to a decision point tonight. Obviously, we've been here for a while. You can continue, if there's any discussion you'd like to have, we're welcome to answer. We're happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, this can remain an agenda item for the foreseeable future as you work through this and kind of formulate ideas.
Yeah, go ahead.
The only two thoughts I had on this was, I noticed that existing trees and roots were considered as a criteria for evaluating the gap installation decisions, but that same comment was not listed as a reason for removing sidewalk from consideration. So I wondered, couldn't that particular item go both ways? And then the other thing that I didn't see in here in this criteria is, maybe I missed it if it was in there, but the flexibility of the decision can be made, a specific decision on a specific area does have some flexibility based on the criteria. So I didn't see that part in there at all.
So to give a little background, the first list was more of a historical brain thought of different reasons why the council may have decided, or the Public Works Board has decided in the past not to install or assess a particular sidewalk within the city. It's not all inclusive. And then the second list was really trying to think back about when either Strand or myself are designing sidewalks, what are the things that we're thinking about that are impacting the decision, and really the great quest from this board, which was what are the criteria that we should be thinking about. And so what I tried to do with the second list was just try to dump issues that may affect sidewalk installation that, and I think Brandon talked about one earlier that Mr. Waters brought up, which is the slope and the shape of the sidewalk throughout a route. Again, that probably falls into one or more of those items.
Right.
But that was the goal for this document, was try to start a conversation, and more than willing to add to both lists.
Okay,
So
thanks.
good point, thanks.
Thanks.
And I think that it can be included in the conversation, and we've, at a staff level, have started having conversations about what options exist for the Public Works Board and ultimately the City Council to undertake, likely at needing to provide higher resources on trees specifically to maximize tree retention. There's things we haven't done in the past that we could do. You can, if you're coming up on a tree that a sidewalk would damage, you can deviate around it. It's not always effective. Sometimes you end up damaging the tree to such an extent that it doesn't survive, and then you have a deviation in the sidewalk there. So there's a trade-off there. And then there's also additional expenses that we could undertake. For example, we could relocate a lateral if a lateral is cutting straight through a tree. We can directionally drill beneath for electric utilities, electric lines specifically that's within conduit. We can go underneath of it. So that, I think those are conversations that'll occur in the future that aren't just sidewalk related, but road reconstruction related, on what resources would ultimately the City Council like to provide to maximize tree retention in an area that's undergoing, and what steps could we take, and what is the delta, the difference between what we what we would do that would result in a high likelihood of a tree needing to be removed and reducing that likelihood, understanding that sometimes in the course of construction, you might hit a root that causes the tree to die, and we might not know that for a couple of years. But what steps we want to take and to maximize tree retention, and if the benefits of retaining those trees matches the amount of resources that are required to undertake those steps.
Okay. Thank you.
So I guess our options on this one would be that we get a recommendation from city staff, or we would go into a work session to discuss this. It seems like we could languish on this for 6 months if we wanted to, or we could just get together and hammer it out and put something together that would come out in a public works meeting that we would vote on.
Correct. I think that would be an appropriate. If you'd like, we can develop recommendations, or we can do both. We can develop recommendations and then bring those to a work session.
And then hammer it out in a work session and
Right.
put together a motion basically, or a resolution.
Correct.
I like that idea, and I would advocate, rather than doing necessarily a sidewalk by sidewalk for starters, is actually to do it by principle or criteria or objective or exclusions. I mean, to map it out in a general direction so that we can see how it overlays. I know there was a discussion, or someone had mentioned in the comprehensive plan meeting regarding an interest in even talking about an old neighborhood overlay. And so I don't know, we can kind of slice it or think about parameters regarding different criteria, different characteristics, but keeping it broad rather than going on a street by street for starters, I think would be helpful.
Yeah. The only item I want to remind the Public Works Board is that whatever sidewalk policy that we end up coming up with is largely going to impact the older, more
Neighborhoods.
established pieces of Lake Mills, because new development by ordinance is
Has new
required to
sidewalks.
install
Yeah.
that. So the sidewalk policy very rarely comes into play for new development because of those ordinances. Really, for new development, it is being installed. It's being installed at developer cost, and it's just implemented that way. So just to keep that in mind as we're talking about the sidewalk policy, it is going to be it's going to apply to areas in the city that are not new development.
Well, but the sidewalk policy is that new development requires a sidewalk. I mean, that's the policy. That's the point.
That's the
Right?
policy.
Correct.
Isn't that a part of?
It's just that
but it's-
piece of it is codified in ordinance rather than
Oh, gotcha.
in the document. So
Okay.
that's just the difference in that. If we wanted to change that, it would be an ordinance revision. The sidewalk policy would not be able to, shouldn't conflict with ordinance. So I agree, though, the policy, the city's policy through ordinance is that new development mandates the installation of sidewalk.
So we'll bring this forward, and was there any actions prior to or bringing this forward again, or not? No. Okay.
If I could just add one comment, the comprehensive plan had an extensive amount of verbiage and focus on transportability, walkability, drivability, movability, whatever that might look like. And so I think this is really important that we kind of get this figured out, and because it's really emphasized. And so I want to make sure that we are thinking about how we align with what that plan really is intending for us to be thinking about. Because I think it's really highlighted. It's important.
Okay, if nothing else, then we'll move on to item 12, discussion.
Mark?
Yeah,
So on this issue, we're going to drive this towards a work session then? Is that where we're going with city recommendations in a work session?
Yep,
Yeah.
we're gonna develop some recommendations for, potential, goals, criteria, some broad kind of ideas and bring that to a work session in the future. So we'll work on scheduling that or having a Public Works Board meeting, work session dedicated, just having a Public Works Board meeting dedicated to that work session.
Thank you.
All right then. Item 12, discussion decision on establishment of meeting times for the next year.
Oh, that was one I brought up. Thank you. This meeting is happening at 5 o'clock, and it's a tough time for me to make those meetings at 5. I would prefer 6 o'clock. I understand the reason behind that was that staff is available at 5 o'clock as they get done with their shift. But I think that by shifting it to a 6 o'clock time frame, it allows the public to have more accessibility to the meeting, to be able to come and share their opinions, where some people may not be able to make that 5 o'clock. So it was my desire to shift this meeting to 6 o'clock instead.
Staff has no objection to a time change.
Right. So previously to the 5 o'clock, it was at 7 o'clock, correct? Yes. So 5, 6, 7 doesn't matter to me.
I'm good with that.
Yep. Mary, do you got any
I like
input?
6 o'clock.
Yeah,
I can
6
support
is
that,
great.
6 o'clock.
Have dinner with my wife.
All right. Let's just, rather than do a formal vote thing, let's just say by unanimous consent at 6 o'clock.
Good.
My new favorite 2 words.
As long as that will work for our new member. I'm hoping so. We have a new Public Works Board member.
Yeah, if staff could reach out to the new Public Works Board member and
Sure.
make sure that works with the person.
I would expect so, because 5 o'clock we move past 6, so I would think that would be okay.
We will do so.
All right. All right, and then moving on, recommendations for future agendas. Well, Paul, you mentioned next month the,
The rate studies.
yes.
Yes, you'll have both water and electric then.
Okay. Any other information or comments?
I have a question. Is there anything on, I don't know the timetable on anything on Sandy Beach. Is there anything the Public Works Board has coming up as due diligence work or planning work or anything that is worthy of conversation, or is that further out in the future?
Our next steps on that are, we're still trying to find a time that works for, that allows for all council members to attend a work session. That's looking like it's going to be in June.
Oh, okay.
So that's our next step, is to get that work session scheduled with the city council.
Okay.
To get some more direction and nail down exactly what the goals and priorities of the RFP are. And they certainly could refer it to a committee for additional review or send it out. So that's our next step, is that work session with the city council.
Okay, I also was, actually, what I was thinking about is the infrastructure improvements. Yeah, and maybe I'm thinking the more guts of the thing, not the restaurant. But I don't know the timetable. I don't know what I just know it's probably a Public Works Board focus area, and I was just curious if that's something that is out. I don't know how far out that is in the plan. That's why I was more curious about it.
I don't have a specific timeline on that for you yet.
Okay.
The infrastructure improvements are, in the original plan, was the phase following the restaurant and parking lot. So it certainly
Oh, okay.
is.
It's ways out.
It's on the horizon, but it was contemplated to occur after the restaurant and parking lot
Okay.
were figured out.
Okay, thanks.
Real quick, Dwayne reminded me that next month we will also have to take a look at the wastewater treatment plant annual report. That has to be officially recommended by you to the council and approved by the council, I believe, before June 30th. So we'll have that for you on the 13th.
I think the Public Works Board ordinance has something about recommending sidewalk repairs also every year. I don't remember exactly when that's done.
June.
I'm sorry, did you say repairing sidewalk?
Yeah,
I think we presented that at the March
Okay.
meeting, if I'm not mistaken.
all right, good.
We are still taking complaints, so I'll just mention that. If there are complaints, we are reviewing those as we speak. We are, correct, Mark? So if there are some others out there, we'll incorporate those as well. Thanks.
Complaints are 24/7, 365.
And it won't be next meeting, but we're entering the summer, which means that we're entering CIP development. So over the summer, prior to August, July, August timeframe, it'll come to the committee for the board for review as well before, with your recommendation to the city council.
And real quick, Mark, if I may, real quick, before you do the next item, I would ask you to include Mark Yandri in on the closed session.
Oh.
So, just so you're aware.
So I should verbally do that? Okay. All right, if nothing else on that, we'll move to item 14, convene into closed session to discuss yard waste center sites pursuant to Wisconsin statutes 19.85 sub 1 sub E, deliberating or negotiating the purchase of public properties, investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive bidding or bargaining reasons require a closed session. At that point, we are now in closed session then? Or we have to, we need to vote on that? To move to vote? Motion to move to closed session.
We need a motion.
I move that we move into closed session.
Second.
Motion and second to move to closed session. All those in favor? We don't need a roll call vote for that, do we?
If it's unanimous, you don't need a roll call vote. If there's an objection, then you need to do a roll call.
I bet it won't. We'll see how it goes. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, that was unanimous. We are in closed session.